Up next, we're going to learn about a completely new kind of cookbook. Adaptive Farms and Resilient Tables is a new cookbook that celebrates culture and sheds light on adaptive farming techniques. Jennifer Baumwoll, one of the creators of this new Canada-UNDP Cookbook, talks about rural communities and how tourism affects even the most remote of regions. This book celebrates cultures in Cabo Verde, Cambodia, Haiti, Mali, Niger, and Sudan, and highlights special recipes that can be made in every kitchen. Jennifer Baumwoll is the project coordinator for the Canada-UNDP Climate Change Adaptation Facility. This project promotes cooperation and shares experiences between 6 developing countries, all engaged in activities to address climate change impacts. Jennifer has been working with the United Nations Development Program since 2008 in the area of climate change adaptation. Her work has focused on helping developing countries address the changing climate conditions, from drought and floods to changing rainfall patterns and sea level rise. With a passion for exploring and discovering different cultures, she has extensive experience traveling, working, and living abroad.
Wow, when I first saw the cookbook, I was so excited because it brings you to think about the link between climate change, what scientists are talking about, what people don't think or people don't believe in, and your reality, your day-to-day reality.
The cookbook is an excellent initiative because sometimes we have different, but we have also commonalities. Sometimes we use the same spice, but it cooks in different ways. We learn from each other. It's an adventure of learning.
So this cookbook is for me an opportunity to raise awareness on the importance of adapting our agricultural practices in general.
Organize people who share the same vision, who share the same understanding and try together as a collectivities to face a climate change.
All right, so thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming and being a part of this, and we're so excited to have the UNDP, have your cookbook featured at this summit, and I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about it, and see where it might be going.
Great, yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Excellent, wonderful. So looking at your cookbook, it is so unique. I love all the different elements that it touches on. And you really focus on destinations and communities that travelers don't normally get to, places like Sudan and so many amazing places like Niger. Why are these places showcased, and what was the objective of having these communities and places and people featured in such a way?
Right, sure. As you say, many of the places that we have showcased and profiled in the cookbook are not your typical travel destination, but they were chosen primarily because they are part of this project that we're working on, typically the communities and the places that we work with are really the most vulnerable, a lot of the poorest communities. These countries were selected specifically because they are part of the group of what the UN calls the least developed countries, so countries that are on the lower end of the the Human Development Index. So that's why they were selected originally. And because they were part of the program that we're working with them on climate change adaptation, we did want to kind of showcase and celebrate them in a way that maybe people haven't seen before. So specifically, who are these communities that we're working with? They're really, as I said, the most vulnerable to a lot of these climate-related impacts. Many times their communities are just trying to get by, put enough food on their table. Many are migrating or selling, different livestock or assets to make ends meet. There are communities where, one storm or one flood event can wipe out their entire crop season and kind of set them back in terms of, their income or other development benefits. So it's really, communities that are struggling, and that when they're dealing with some of these climate related impacts, so they're seeing more storms, more floods, more drought, in general drier conditions or changing rainfall seasons. They're feeling those impacts directly. To the food on their table. And so, they're not necessarily the places or the people that we typically visit. In many of the countries, as you mentioned, Sudan, Niger, Mali, there is political unrest or violence, places that it's not always easy to get to. But I think this actually makes the cookbook even more important, and the work that we're doing to kind of celebrate and showcase these countries even more important. So even if we can't physically get to some of these places, we can still introduce some of their traditions, some of their experiences through a publication like this. So you've never been to Niger, check out your local African market that might be selling some spices from that part of the world, or talk to a restaurant owner who might be from one of these places. And that's what the cookbook's all about, is talking about these traditions, using food as an entry point to talk about these people, these places where we haven't necessarily been, and share their experiences specifically around climate change adaptation, so that people can learn about different parts of the world and what's happening there.
Wow, wonderful. And it's such a creative project. I just thought, how great of a way to show how climate change is affecting real people through a platform like a cookbook. I just really thought that was a great idea. And so I'm interested to learn, there's communities around the world that are being affected by climate change, and climate change, there's lots of reasons behind it. But I'm interested to know what travelers have, and to what tourism has, what kind of role it has in climate change, and how a traveler's choices could affect these communities, most likely indirectly, but no,
it's an important question, and it's something I think, if we're thinking big picture and we're talking about the impacts of climate change, I think travel and how it's typically done often does contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about increasing waste, environmental degradation. There are these kind of bigger impacts which do trickle down and affect the type of communities that we're working with here. But I think what's maybe a more interesting story and a more interesting perspective on this is kind of what the opportunity tourism can provide for some of these communities. I think many times these communities are isolated or don't have access to certain markets, and having certain types of tourism, and I think a lot of the type of sustainable tourism that the people involved in this conference and people who work with your organization are interested in, is a really great way to provide opportunities for some of these more marginalized communities. And I can give you some examples from these projects. In Cambodia, for example, some of the communities that we're working with are introducing vegetable gardens, which are a way to diversify the crops so they're not so dependent on the rice crop, which is their staple crop, which is increasingly being impacted by changing rainfall patterns, and increasing drought, and in some cases floods as well. And so now that they have this variety of vegetables, some of them are actually looking to local ecotourism locations to supply the vegetables and make a bit more income there. So it provides a bit of an incentive for some of these communities to take these steps towards adaptation and in diversifying in this example. In Cape Verde, there's a women's collective which decided to, with support from the project, took some of the mango tree mangoes from the local trees and made juice out of them, and are now selling that on the local market. And so, there are opportunities that can arise through tourism if it's done, in a informed and sustainable way that can support some of these communities, which are often more, marginalized or isolated from the main markets.
Wow, interesting. Awesome. I'm interested to see, because all these communities are handling climate change differently, and so they're tackling all these problems, I'm sure different problems for different communities, and then they've decided to, come together and find a solution that works. Would you mind talking about one or two communities that you focused on and the kinds of problems they're dealing with climate change and how they came together and created a solution for it?
Yeah, sure. I think, if we look at a place like Mali, for instance, which is, it's in West Africa, it's a landlocked country, very dry. Most of the country is part of the Sahara region. They do have, the Niger Delta around the Niger River, which does provide some fertile land. But in general, it's a fairly dry country. The climate change is causing the dryness to increase. They're dealing with a lot of drought conditions. Again, the rainfall patterns are changing, so the seasons shift. They're getting shorter. It's much more difficult to predict and to plan for growing seasons. 80% of the population is in the agriculture sector, and most of that is from smallholder farmers. So we're talking about households or groups of households who are dependent on these agricultural inputs or production for their income. So we focused on this project with 4 different municipalities within the country that were particularly vulnerable, particularly poor, that did not have kind of the reserve when these impacts were being seen. They didn't really have the reserve to cope with them very well. So some of the types of activities that we supported and that these communities engaged in was access to more sustainable resource of water. So that means not just going in and digging a well or putting in a pump, which was part of it, but also introducing different types of water management practices. So understanding how to better conserve water or different ways of irrigating crops that would use less water or use water more efficiently. Introducing different types of crops, so crops that were more adaptive to drought conditions, had a shorter season, so that some of these these agricultural seasons you could have more than one crop within one of the agricultural seasons. We worked a lot with women, particularly, who are seen particularly as vulnerable to climate change, these type of impacts, but are also very knowledgeable around natural resource management in their area, and they're aware of the needs of the household, since their responsibilities are often focused on water and getting water and producing and consuming food. So working with them to, as I mentioned, similar to Cambodia, to introducing vegetable gardens to diversify their crop, giving them some kind of ownership over some land to be able to produce crops that could be sold on the market and add to the income, and also promoting gardening and vegetable production in the dry season, so not being so dependent on one season for the staple crop to generate the main income, but really diversifying. And so that was often done through collectives of women farmers, which are often established, within these areas, and are a good way of working to introduce a lot of these practices and working within those groups. In all of our work, the ideas and the design of the different types of interventions do come from these communities and the local governments that are working with them. So a lot of these are very specific to the context of that area, and the specific needs of the communities. Often there's groups that are involved in the decision making throughout the process as well. So as things change or needs change, that's adjusted as well. So that's one example from one of the countries, and there's much more information in the cookbook about this. But these communities are seeing these type of impacts when we're talking about in this case a lot of drought and shifting rainfall seasons, and they're introducing some really amazing practices that are helping them be a bit more resilient and deal with these changes a bit easier.
Nice, that's exciting. And needed, very much needed.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested, like you mentioned before, these places are not, really high traffic places for tourists or travelers. But what are some steps that travelers can take to travel in a more climate conscious way, so that whatever they are doing during their travels, it is positively affecting these communities now? And we touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm interested to hear more thoughts on that.
There's obviously, as I mentioned before, a big picture. There are ways to kind of reduce our footprint, so to speak. But I think in this context, we're talking about the adaptation angle. I really think just being better informed travelers is really important. Being conscious about where we're going and the challenges or the needs of the people that we're interacting with, doing the research ahead of time and understanding kind of their specific context. Once, in country, or once we're interacting with the different places and the people where we are, really tapping into some of the locally organized options. A lot of community-based organizations are doing really amazing things around ecotourism, which I'm sure this conference is highlighting several of them. And being open to purchasing or eating local goods and products and foods that are in the place where you are, as opposed to hoping that you can get the same type of food that you're used to back home, and just keeping an open mind, being in these countries. I mean, one of the exciting things about working in the countries we are under this project is that the reputations are often very different than what's actually there on the ground. I mean, you take Sudan, for example, and we often read pretty disturbing news about Sudan in the paper, and at least where I live. And yes. I think getting to know the country in a different way, and being open to that, is really important. And you find just an amazing, place, amazing people, amazing food, amazing experiences. That's really great. So and I mean, food is always a really great place to start in terms of the conversation, and that's actually where this whole idea of the cookbook came from. I mean, traveling to some of these communities where we're working, trying to figure out what has been the impact when it comes to climate change, and how is this project really affecting you and your life. It's a difficult question to answer, and it's not always it didn't always lead to very interesting discussion. But then you start talking about food. What did you cook last night, or what were you cooking a year ago, and how has that changed? What are the ingredients? Where are you getting them? What type of cooking utensils or cooking methods are you using? That's when people get kind of excited and start talking, and you can learn a lot about people, about a place, and about kind of the society just by entering the conversation through food. So that's what we've attempted to do here with the cookbook, and I think it's a nice approach and a nice model maybe for travelers elsewhere as well.
Excellent. I'd like to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned, in the initial planning stages, before you travel, is doing your research and making sure that you collect as much information as possible, and that you are advised of, cultural, etiquette and, the current happenings in the destination that you're traveling to. Do you have resources that you like to use to find out these facts and to learn about communities before you travel?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, working for an organization like UNDP, we're fortunate in that we have offices in all of these countries. We have, I think it's over 170 offices around the world. And most of those offices are staffed with local staff. So I have the advantage that before I enter a country, I have this relationship and interaction with my colleagues who are from that country, and I try to glean as much information from them as I can ahead of time, and then actually when in country as well, just asking a lot of questions and observing a lot and trying to figure out the broader context. So in that sense, it might be a bit different than some other travelers, but I do think there are a lot of resources out there that do provide the type of information, whether it's more kind of formal review from different government websites or research that way, or just from other blogs and people who have done similar types of travel. I think there's a lot of opportunity there's so much information out there now. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of do a bit more digging before you step foot in a new place.
Absolutely. And that's something that Immersion is working on. We'd like to become a platform for some of that information, just to make it easy for people to stop by and then have access to a lot of those resources and websites that you talked about. We've been, researching and gleaning some of our own resources, and just hoping to have a good platform for people to use. All right. I agree. So I guess I'd like to get more into the food topic. So I'm interested to learn a little bit about some of the recipes that are featured in this cookbook, and what was your process in featuring them, and what was kind of the idea behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, the idea of this book was really to kind of learn and celebrate the different communities that we've been working with through food. And so as we developed the idea and kind of the design of the cookbook, we again went straight to the source. We went to our project teams. We went to the people who are working in the communities or the communities themselves in these countries, and really and asked them to submit recipes that they thought were representative of kind of a traditional dish, or we had a few different criteria, something that a typical farmer would eat for lunch, or something that is cooked on, a big festival or an important holiday, a drink that people often make from some of the local ingredients. And so we asked, different categories of recipes, and we got quite a number back, and kind of sifted through them and worked to figure out which recipes translated best, which in terms of ingredients that were available, methods that were more manageable or approachable to people that had, in different parts of the world. And that's kind of how we ended up compiling the ones that we did. But you'll see, in the book, that the recipes are just part of the story. And again, it's kind of an entry point into the discussion. But we really talk about, the different ingredients that are in the recipe and how they're being impacted by climate change, comparing the different types of crops or different types of water management approaches across the 6 countries. That was something else that we were really interested in. So there's a lot of content there. It's not only the recipes, right. But of course that's the exciting piece of it, because it's some really beautiful food that's presented.
Mm-hmm. Could you share an example of one of the recipes?
Yeah, sure. One of the ones that I really like a lot. I am vegetarian, so there were some of the recipes are a lot of meat is presented here. But one of the ones that I really liked was from Cape Verde, which is the katupa, which I think is how you pronounce it. And what really it was really cool about this recipe is that it varies depending on who you talk to and where you are in the country. So they're very regional. Types, it changes depending on the region you're in. And Cape Verde, if you know the country, it has I think there are 8 or 9 islands. Most of them are inhabited. I think maybe 9 out of the 10 are inhabited, and they're very different types of contexts across those different islands. You have islands that are mountainous, you have islands that are very flat, and beach islands. You have an island that's within a volcano. It's really interesting country. So you have this recipe that kind of changes depending on where you are in the country and what type of ingredients are available. It's kind of base is in corn and beans, so that's kind of in all of them, and then it will vary depending on where you are and whose kitchen you're in or whose table you're sitting at, which I think is really just, I don't know, a nice way to kind of represent the specificity and the changing context within even a small country like that. And then when it comes to looking at the climate change issues, I mean, that's so important. As we, the different crops will react to different impacts differently. As I mentioned before, you need to have more kind of diversity so that you're not so dependent on one crop for your income. So you have this change and this variety, and a recipe like this, which is kind of like a stew, with different types of ingredients in it, can shift and adapt to that change. So I think that's really exciting and a really beautiful kind of representation of kind of the messages that we're trying to look at here.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorites. There's also one of the favorites, and I did work with my colleague to test some of these recipes, which was a lot of fun. And one of my favorites was the gurasa from Sudan, which is kind of like a pancake which has some dates in it, and it's very good, nice and sweet. And I mean, you can't go wrong with dates. So.
Wow, beautiful. What an exciting way to learn about the world and learn how climate change is affecting those communities, but also how people are adapting and making sure that these changes aren't going to stop them or
yeah, these people are doing really amazing things. I mean, that's what's so exciting and we really want to kind of celebrate that through this work. So, climate change isn't always doom and gloom, which is often is seen as. There's really some amazing work going on around the world, and people are really kind of stepping up to the challenge and dealing with some of these impacts as they come. So yeah, it can be really exciting.
Yeah. Wow.
And delicious.
Yes. Delicious. I ordered the book. I can't wait to see it, and I am excited to try some of those recipes out for sure. Yeah, and thank you so much. Thank you for doing this project and for bringing this knowledge, to viewers around the world and readers and chefs. Those of us who would like to be chefs in our kitchens, trying new recipes. So yeah, and is there anything else that you would like to share with viewers that we didn't touch on?
No, I mean, I think we are, in terms of being able to see and read what we're talking about, we are working on an electronic version, which will be kind of a little more interactive and fun and tablet friendly, and that will be available for free online, hopefully, in the next month or so. So yeah, by the time this airs, perhaps. That'll be a great way to kind of get this out there. And yeah, I think again, it's really about these different countries and really getting a different view on what we typically hear and read about some of these places, and even some of the poorest and most vulnerable places. I mean, they have something to share with us, and a lot that we can learn from them in terms of adaptation, and of course in terms of delicious food. So I hope that's of interest to the viewers, and yeah,
Absolutely.
I appreciate you having us and being able to share our work. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.